Hey, this is Isaac Kotek, and this is going to be my review video of day 3 at Ableton Loop. This was probably my favorite day of programming, actually. I was really looking forward to 2 major discussions, and there was lots of other classes and things in between that were also inspirational. So the main one I was excited about was the roundtable on Diaspora. And for those who don't know, Diaspora is when you have a culture, usually from one area or one group, that needs to leave and be spread out amongst the world. Usually this is due to war, genocide, famine, something like that. The first thing that I really enjoyed about this roundtable was that it wasn't just white Europeans. Actually, it was a huge mix of people from around the world. We had, in this discussion, people from Egypt, people from Syria, Syrian refugees. We had people from Turkey, as well as United Kingdoms, America, whatever, all over, so that it was a very diverse discussion, which was really good and really important, and also showed that at Loop there was a diverse collection of people. It wasn't just like a totally whitewashed European kind of gathering, which I really enjoyed, and it made me realize that there was pretty good representation at all the panel discussions and all the performances of gender balances, of people from around the world representing music, not just from like the same white European perspective. So I enjoyed that. And the conversation was amazing. It was, instead of a top-down thing, it was all these people discussing together around this huge table. It looked like this old kind of corporate board meeting room, which was really sweet. There was like 20-something people. And the discussion centered around diaspora and how that might affect people, or does affect people. Really interesting conversation. Some of the main points that I had was a discussion on tools and how live and other electronic music tools really force people into a very Western perspective, because you can't pick scales and things like that, change temperament. And then I brought up like how I am very interested in the subject and have maqams and other things on my site, and it led to cool conversations around education and how we can make it more approachable for people of different cultures to use these software and things. But a big piece of that as well was one person was talking about how they wanted to play maqams, and instead of using like a fretless guitar, using a fretted guitar and then doing slight bends when you're trying to get those lower fifths or thirds or whatever to get those double flats or whatever. And it was interesting to think of how the problem of using instruments that don't create the music that you want and using it to create or get close to the traditional sounds that you wanted births new sounds. It brings new scales and new ideas. And in this discussion I brought up Armenian music has a history of that, where it was this Persian type of music and scale system, and then when you had the Catholics and Christians coming in later, the people wanted to start writing kind of choral music with that, and they created their own type of scales and systems of doing it, which led to a very unique sounding music. So these kind of problems create opportunity and create whole new systems and sounds. And that was one way diaspora can have not necessarily a positive effect, but an effect and change the history of music. And another really cool thing we talked about was identity and how identity plays into this. Where do you identify as someone from that country that you came from, or do you want to identify more from the new place that you are, and how that might affect you internally and then affect your music? And it led to a long discussion about what identity is, because some people might identify more with not where they live, but where they culturally are. Let's say they're transgender or queer, and they're more interested in that community than they are from the country of origin that they were in, because they've moved from there to a place that they might be more comfortable in that community, and how that interplays in identity as compared to someone who just like were forced out of their home. Maybe they were a traditional instrumentalist and they identify with that, So therefore the diaspora kind of affects them in a different way. That also led to cultural appropriationism about how that interplays with identity. When you take on somebody else's identity, mainly the discussion was around power and privilege, where if you're a privileged and powered group and there's a marginal group and you're taking from the marginalized group and kind of reframing it, that's appropriationism. Specifically, this becomes a problem with money. As soon as money's involved, it gets very weird. And it feels like when that piece is taken out, that kind of like capitalistic part, that it leads more to collaboration. And the last thing I'll lead about that, I mean, I could go on for hours about this. This is one of the things we talked about at the end, about how important this conversation is and how we can keep going with it. You can write dissertations on this and really explore it, and how we should as a culture. But one of the things that was brought up towards the end was the internet, and how the internet has changed culture. How sounds don't really feel like they're from one place in particular anymore. There's so much interweaving, and we can look up instrumentation and history of different places so easily through the internet. And how before we were of a space, right? We were of, let's say, just one area in the world. But now with the internet, it can feel like we are of that space, but we are also of the world. So when we move, that internet community we might have had moves with us still, or stays online in this other third place, this third space. And how that might affect identity, how that might affect musicality between cultures. And that was a really interesting point, lots to play with there. So that was just like my morning session. That was the roundtable. It was like an hour and a half or an hour or something, really inspirational. And from there, I went into the music technology panel discussion, which had 2 teachers and a programmer. And then it was facilitated by Dennis DeSantis. And I loved this conversation. This really shows the ethos of Ableton as a company right now. So you had 2 teachers and this programmer. This programmer helped create the part of the website. It's this new learning music part on ableton.com. And it's a really great way of showing simple concepts to new students. And they just made this for free, and you can just check it out. And these teachers were discussing what tools they would like to see, how musical technology, music educational tools affect their classroom, what they want. And it seems like there's a big hole for music technology, specifically educational resources, to have a very applicable, easy way of using it in the classroom. There's a great conversation around that, really inspirational about the future of music education. And yeah, I was really inspired as a teacher and as someone who worked with schools. And again, it shows the ethos of Ableton by bringing teachers and technologists together to have conversations and hopefully make ways of affecting the future and the future of education and music. Then the rest of the time, I had amazing collaboration, conversations, connections, networking for the rest of the day, and that was one of the things I liked the most about this event. I got to hang out with people that I've been talking with online. I got to meet new MIDI controller companies. I've got to talk with people about what they're doing with their music, help some other people. When they had questions, they would come up to me and ask like, oh, how do I do this in my set or whatever? And that to me really summed up what is happening at Loop. Loop is not just this top-down information, but it's very collaborative, very networking and inspirational. They have all these things that you can play with and do to connect with other people. I also love how there was next to no parts in the program where it was a single person talking. Most of them were panel discussions. Most of it was bringing different people together in conversation. You'd have 2 people on stage talking. And that led to much more interesting, interactive ways of learning as compared to a single PowerPoint presentation. So I loved it. I loved Loop. I'm going to go to every year that I can. I'm so thankful and grateful for everyone I connected with. For those at Loop who met me or didn't, please contact and connect with me. My name is Isaac Kotek. I go by Subaqueous. I have a website, subaqueousmusic.com. tons of free articles, you name it, 200 plus free instruments, packs, samples, whatever. So check that out, and really grateful for the team at Ableton. You totally rocked it. I loved it, and hope to go back to Loop and see y'all there. So until then, party on, make music, chat later.